Yeah, so that actually leads me to another point, perhaps when we go to money managers, what's the difference between resilience and risk, avoiding risk? Because money managers try to avoid risk, and they also try to avoid drawdowns. When you make a lot of profit, if you go down from a high profit period, you go down, make a lot of losses. So what's the difference between risk and resilience? Risk is essentially a standard deviation concept. So it's a static concept, while resilience is a dynamic concept. It's over time. You have a shock and then you bounce back. So you measure it in terms of mean reversion or half-life of a shock and things like that. While risk you would measure as a variance or standard deviation or something like that. And typically when you want to avoid risk, or let me put it differently, I would like to push a shift in mindset where our societies, especially in Europe, are very more focused on avoiding risk. And I would argue that not every risk is the same. There's risk which comes with resilience, and these risks are not dangerous. And actually, we should take this type of risk. So if we do trial and error and we experiment with new things, but as long as we know we can bounce back from that, then actually is not a big deal. So actually, we can have some setbacks. As long as we bounce back, we should take risks along these lines. But there's some other risks where what they're called is a resilience destroyer. So if there's a shock and we cannot bounce back, these type of risks we should avoid. So rather than saying, we want to avoid risk at any cost, we should say, let's avoid the risk without resilience, and the risk which come with resilience but help us to experiment and try out new things, we should actually take. So what are these resilience destroyers? The resilience destroyers are traps, for example. Middle income trap, liquidity trap. Economics has a lot of these traps. So in a sense, there is already some literature there in economics about resilience if you think about all the traps we have studied.
So can I just quickly clarify, because these are already quite a few terms. Just for your example, the middle income trap is where a country, like for example Mexico, had high growth, but then it got stuck in what they call like a middle income country level, and where there were expectations that it would join the advanced economy, so to say. It got stuck there, and this is a bit of a conundrum and related to what you read about in the book, right? And what was a liquidity trap again?
So typically, there's this phenomenon that the emerging economies should catch up with the advanced economies, but they catch up initially, and then at some point they're in the middle income trap and they can't really go to the frontier. And the explanation is often that the economy or the social setup you need in order to do frontier research is very different from the economy you need to copy and catch up. And that's why you get caught in the middle income trap. The alternative is like a poverty trap where poor people just face a negative shock and then they can't come back. And it's another form of trap. And there are many, many traps. So that's one resilience killer. So traps are resilience killers. And then there are also feedbacks. They're even worse than traps. So once you're hit by a shock, there's a feedback loop and makes things worse and worse. So these are liquidity, there's some spirals or feedbacks. And typically they're hit when you hit a tipping point. And they're in society, but they're also in environmental or in general in any system. If the Gulf Stream were to stop, then you can't make the Gulf Stream start again. So I moved a little bit away now from the money manager. Yeah. But so essentially, we should now come back to the money manager. So the money manager should actually not say, I want to minimize my risk. I would like to minimize the risk associated with non-resilience. So if there's a risk from which I cannot bounce back, I should really avoid that. I have to, but other risks which are temporary risk and I can bounce back from by re-optimizing my portfolio, or readjusting my portfolio, whatever he wants to do. So we have to have a shift away from a risk management to resilience management approach. And I think that's a broader message of the book I wanted to get across, that in the financial sector, but mostly in our societies, in many of our societies, we are too afraid of taking on any risks. We should actually take certain risks if they come with resilience, and they give other benefits. This trial and error approach and other things, we're trying out new technologies, openness to new approaches. As long as they come with resilience and we can manage it and we improve our resilience attitude, how agile we can react to that, we should actually take on more risks, because that's how progress happens. Yeah. And if I go back to the environment, sometimes it might be the only way to avoid some tipping points. So it could be that in environment, if we don't take any risk and we just continue as we're going actually down the drain. So we have to experiment with new technologies, innovations in environmental space in order to get out of the current situation.
So just if I can maybe think of an example with that when it comes to money managers, and then you can say if that's a correct example or not.
Yeah.
But for example, so maybe some money managers want to invest in economies, in macroeconomies. I'm taking this example because that's the stuff I'm interested in. But let's say like in 1997, you had the Asian financial crisis. And around that period, there was a lot of volatility. But an economy like South Korea turned out to be highly resilient, right? Whereas some economies like perhaps Indonesia, I think at the time, proved to be far less resilient. But they were both at the time equally risky if you take the sort of finance way of measuring risk, which is a standard deviation of, the price. Is that a good example?
That's a very good example. So, and it often depends on the policies you take after a shock, whether you can bounce back more easily or not. And from an ex-ante perspective, if you know that a certain economy will take certain policies to bounce back more easily, then as a global hedge fund manager, for example, you have to take this into account when you make your investment. So it's not only about the current risk, how risky is Indonesia versus South Korea, but what is the political framework to allow the political framework to take certain measures to bounce back more easily. And that's what should be a big input in your portfolio choice.